Should Canada agree to Donald Trump's request to become the 51st U.S. state of America to avoid tariffs and enjoy the defense the USA provides? Or should Donnie leave Canada alone and Canada would be much better without the U.S.? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. Canada is gearing up for a bold counterstrike against President Donald Trump's latest trade move, a set of hefty tariffs that kicked off on March 4th. And Ontario's Premier, Doug Ford, isn't holding back. Ford has made it crystal clear. If the US pushes Canada into a corner, Ontario is ready to hit back where it hurts. One of the most dramatic options on the table, shutting down electricity exports to American states that rely on Canadian power. Speaking at a press conference on Monday, Ford didn't mince words. He called out the U.S. for what he sees as an economic attack, warning that Ontario could pull the plug on states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, places that depend heavily on electricity imports from Canada. If they think they can crush Ontario's economy, they've got another thing coming, Ford declared. I'll cut off their power and won't lose a wink of sleep over it. His words sent shockwaves through both sides of the border. The tariffs, set at 25% on Canadian exports and 10% on energy, could send ripples through industries like auto manufacturing, steel production, and everyday consumer goods. But Ford's message was clear. Canada isn't going to take this lying down. Electricity isn't the only bargaining chip Ford is considering. If the US moves ahead with these tariffs, Ontario is eyeing several tough countermeasures. One idea? Slapping a surcharge on every megawatt of electricity sold to American buyers, making it much more expensive for U.S. businesses and households. Another? Scrapping a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink internet service, a move that could impact satellite internet expansion in remote areas. And in a particularly bold gesture, Ford is even considering yanking American-made alcohol from Ontario's liquor stores. That means U.S. whiskey, bourbon, and beer could disappear from shelves overnight. Economists are already warning that Trump's tariff plan could send shockwaves through Canada's job market and drive up prices on essential goods. Ontario, being the country's manufacturing powerhouse, is bracing for a rough ride. Ford's tough stance signals that Canada isn't willing to sit back and absorb the hit. If the U.S. turns up the heat, Ontario is ready to fight fire with fire. Ontario is gearing up for a massive financial defense plan as trade tensions with the U.S. reach a boiling point. With over $40 billion set aside, including a special $5 billion emergency fund, the province is ready to cushion the economic blow. This money is earmarked for tax breaks, payroll support, and direct assistance to cities. Anything to help businesses and workers stay afloat if things go south. Even with these preparations, Ontario Premier Doug Ford admits there's a lot of uncertainty ahead. We have no clue what's coming next. Honestly, I don't even think President Trump knows what's coming next, he said, capturing the unpredictability of the situation. Companies on both sides of the border are holding their breath, waiting to see if the U.S. will push forward with the planned tariffs. If they do, it could send shockwaves through supply chains, manufacturing, and everyday costs. The federal government isn't sitting this one out either. Ford has made it clear that he backs a dollar-for-dollar retaliation strategy. If the U.S. raises tariffs, Canada will do the same. While he hasn't outlined specific countermeasures at the provincial level yet, his stance suggests Ontario is willing to take aggressive steps if needed. With the deadline just hours away, both Canada and the U.S. are on high alert. If Washington moves forward with the tariffs, it could mark the beginning of a prolonged economic showdown between two nations that have long been close trading partners. For years, the U.S. has relied heavily on imports to fuel its economy. Energy, raw materials, food, technology, and even skilled workers from other countries have played a huge role in American growth. But under Trump's America First approach, trade policies have taken a sharp turn. Tariffs and restrictions on key trading partners, including Canada, China, and the European Union, have disrupted long-standing supply chains. While the goal is to boost American industries, the reality is more complicated. Many U.S. businesses depend on international goods and resources, and these policies are forcing them to rethink how they operate. It's not just about finished products. Some of the most crucial U.S. imports are the building blocks of modern industry. From crude oil and rare earth minerals to electricity and advanced technology components, the American economy relies on a steady flow of materials from beyond its borders. For decades, the U.S. has thrived on innovation, but behind every major breakthrough in science, medicine, and technology is a workforce that includes some of the best minds from around the world. Skilled immigrants have played a massive role in advancing industries like artificial intelligence, biotech, and aerospace. But with growing trade tensions and shifting policies under the Trump administration, there's a rising concern. Will the U.S. continue to attract top talent, or will restrictive policies push them elsewhere? While this may not seem directly tied to trade wars, the reality is clear. Countries that welcome global expertise gain a competitive edge. If the U.S. limits access to international talent, it risks falling behind in crucial fields that drive economic growth. Faced with mounting pressure from new U.S. tariffs, Canada isn't just considering the usual trade penalties. Instead, officials are looking at deeper, more disruptive countermeasures, ones that could have an immediate impact on America's economy. One of the most serious options? Cutting off or limiting the supply of oil and electricity to the U.S. Since energy is the lifeblood of modern economies, even a small disruption could create significant economic ripples, affecting businesses, transportation, and everyday consumers. Beyond energy, Canada is also considering restrictions on natural gas and rare earth elements, materials crucial for industries like national defense, renewable energy, and advanced technology manufacturing. These elements are key components in things like electric vehicle batteries, smartphones and high-tech electronics, military radar systems, and fighter jets, wind turbines, and solar panels. By tightening its grip on these exports, Canada could force the U.S. to seek alternative suppliers, which may be more expensive or unreliable. The numbers don't lie. The United States heavily depends on Canada for its energy needs. In 2024 alone, America imported almost $130 billion worth of Canadian energy, reinforcing just how crucial this relationship is. Crude oil, 1.46 billion barrels, valued at $116.8 billion. Natural gas, 2,701 billion cubic feet, worth $10.8 billion. Electricity, 37 terawatt hours, totaling 1.85 billion. Uranium, 10 million pounds, valued at 400 million. Among these, crude oil dominates, forming the backbone of America's transportation, manufacturing, and energy production sectors. If Canada were to scale back supply, the effects could be felt immediately at the pump, in factories, and across industries reliant on oil-based products. Historically, Canada has sold most of its oil, gas, and energy products to the U.S., making it its biggest customer. However, as trade conflicts intensify, Canada is actively working to reduce its reliance on the U.S. market by expanding exports to Asia. This strategy is part of a long-term plan to ensure that Canada isn't overly dependent on a single buyer, especially one that may impose sudden and unpredictable trade restrictions. A game-changer in this shift is the Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX pipeline, completed in early 2024. This massive infrastructure project connects Alberta's oil fields to Canada's Pacific coast, giving direct access to Asian markets like China, Japan, and South Korea. And it didn't take long to see results. By September 2024, major refiners in Japan, South Korea, and Brunei received their first shipments of Canadian crude oil, marking a historic shift in Canada's trade strategy. China, the world's fastest-growing energy consumer, has dramatically increased its purchases of Canadian oil and gas. In just the first 11 months of 2024, Alberta's energy exports to China hit $2 billion, a 500% increase compared to the same period in 2023. This surge signals a significant rebalancing of trade, showing that Canada is no longer as dependent on U.S. demand as it once was. Japan has also emerged as a major buyer of Canadian energy, seeking alternatives to traditional oil suppliers in the Middle East. With increasing global uncertainty and supply chain disruptions, Japan views Canada as a stable and reliable source of energy. This growing partnership strengthens Canada's position in the global energy market while further reducing its reliance on the U.S. Canada's evolving trade strategy sends a clear message. While the US has been its biggest customer for decades, that dynamic is changing fast. If trade tensions escalate, Canada now has other buyers lined up, ensuring that it won't be left vulnerable. As tensions rise over potential US tariffs, Alberta is making moves to expand its energy exports beyond North America. In February 2025, Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, stressed the need to strengthen trade relationships with Japan. With the possibility of US trade restrictions looming, securing new buyers for Canadian natural gas and crude oil has become a top priority. While the US is a major energy producer, it still leans on imports to meet demand in different regions and industries. Even with domestic production on the rise, certain resources like crude oil, natural gas, and electricity are still heavily sourced from Canada. The US energy supply isn't just about what it produces, it's also about what it imports to keep the system running smoothly. Here's what makes up a big chunk of those imports: crude oil and petroleum products, natural gas, electricity, coal, uranium. Each of these plays a crucial role in keeping industries powered, homes heated, and businesses running. But Canada's dominance in supplying these resources gives it a major bargaining chip in any trade dispute. Oil remains king when it comes to US energy imports. In 2024, the country brought in an average of 6.1 million barrels per day, and a staggering 4 million of those came from Canada. That's 67% of total US oil imports, flowing through pipelines like Keystone XL and Enbridge Mainline. Even though the US produces plenty of oil on its own, refineries are built to process heavier crude grades, the kind that comes from Canada. Without those imports, refineries would have to scramble for new suppliers, driving up costs and potentially disrupting fuel production. It's not just oil. Canada is also the biggest supplier of natural gas to the US. In 2024, the US imported 8.5 billion cubic feet per day, with Canada supplying 7.4 billion cubic feet per day. Much of this gas is sent to the Midwest and Northeast, where it's a critical part of winter heating and industrial power generation. A sudden cut in supply would send energy prices soaring, especially during colder months when demand is highest. Beyond oil and gas, the US also relies heavily on Canadian electricity. In 2024, it imported 38.92 terawatt hours, with Canada supplying 95% of that total. States like New York and Michigan are particularly dependent on Canadian power, especially during peak demand seasons. Losing that supply would force them to find alternative sources, likely at a higher cost. Coal isn't as big a player as it used to be, but it still has a role. In 2024, the US imported 4 million short tons, mainly from Colombia, Indonesia, and Canada. While most coal-fired power plants in the US rely on domestic production, these imports help fulfill specific needs like steel manufacturing. One often overlooked energy import is uranium, which fuels America's nuclear reactors. In 2024, the US imported 50 million pounds of uranium, and Canada supplied 20% of that total. This sector has been shaken up by new sanctions against Russia, leading to a sharp decline in Russian uranium imports. That makes Canada's role in supplying this critical fuel even more important. If Canada decides to scale back or halt energy exports in response to US tariffs, the effects would be immediate and far-reaching. Cutting off oil alone would leave American refineries scrambling for alternatives. A disruption in natural gas would spike heating costs in key regions. A reduction in electricity exports could lead to shortages during peak demand. With Canada supplying such a large portion of US energy needs, any move to restrict exports wouldn't just be a trade dispute. It would be a seismic shift in North American energy dynamics. As trade tensions heat up, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is taking a cautious approach, urging a balanced response to potential US tariffs. Instead of immediate drastic action, the federal government is considering strategic countermeasures, including placing tariffs on American steel, aluminum, and even everyday products like orange juice. However, not everyone agrees with this measured stance. Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party and a strong contender to replace Trudeau, has made it clear that if the US moves forward with its tariffs, Canada must hit back hard. Poilievre isn't interested in waiting things out. He believes these tariffs would be harmful to both countries and is pushing for an aggressive response. His plan? Targeted economic countermeasures designed to directly impact the U.S. economy. But his vision extends beyond just fighting back. He's also calling for Canada to broaden its trade relationships, reducing reliance on the U.S. market to avoid being vulnerable to these kinds of economic disputes in the future. One of the most high-stakes countermeasures Canada could take is reducing or completely halting oil exports to the U.S. But this wouldn't just be a simple trade dispute. It would trigger a domino effect with major economic and political consequences for both nations. If Canada pulls back on oil and electricity exports, states like Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, which heavily depend on Canadian energy, would feel the pinch first. Fuel prices would spike, putting pressure on consumers and businesses. Industries relying on stable energy costs, from manufacturing to transportation, would struggle with rising expenses. Supply chain disruptions could ripple across the country, affecting everything from fuel distribution to consumer goods. And it wouldn't stop there. A sudden reduction in Canadian energy exports would drive up electricity costs, especially in regions that rely on imported power during peak demand seasons. But let's not forget, this move wouldn't be painless for Canada either. Crude oil exports make up a huge chunk of Canada's economy, and a sudden drop in sales would create problems at home. GDP growth could slow down, weakening Canada's economic momentum. Job losses in the energy sector would likely increase, particularly in Alberta, which is the country's top oil-producing province. Provincial budgets could take a hit, potentially leading to political friction between Alberta and Ottawa. And that's just the financial side. Inflation could rise, making everyday goods more expensive for Canadians, while reduced energy revenues could put additional strain on government programs and services. Beyond the economic shockwaves, restricting energy exports could severely strain U.S.-Canada relations. With both countries bound by the USMCA trade agreement, an escalation in this dispute could threaten future trade negotiations. The U.S. wouldn't sit back quietly either. Washington could respond with additional tariffs or trade penalties, further worsening the situation. A tit-for-tat economic battle could drag on for months or even years, making it harder for both nations to find a resolution. When you flip a light switch in parts of the US, there's a good chance that electricity came from Canada. As one of the biggest energy suppliers to its southern neighbor, Canada plays a huge role in keeping American homes, businesses, and industries running smoothly. The two countries share an interconnected grid system, making it easy to move electricity across the border. But if that flow were suddenly reduced or cut off, the consequences could be felt almost immediately, and not just in the energy sector. Some of the biggest power-hungry regions in the US, like the Midwest and Northeast, rely heavily on Canadian electricity to balance supply and meet demand, especially during extreme weather when energy use skyrockets. If Canada were to pull back on exports, the US would be forced to find alternatives, which wouldn't be cheap. Electricity prices would rise, hitting consumers and businesses alike. Manufacturers, tech companies, and farms, which depend on steady, affordable power, could face higher costs and reduced productivity. Grid instability could increase, leading to power shortages or even outages in states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, places that are particularly reliant on Canadian energy. Higher electricity costs don't just mean pricier utility bills. They have a ripple effect that touches nearly every part of the economy. Factories may scale back operations to cut costs, leading to lower production and potential job losses. Farms that rely on automated systems could see increased expenses, affecting food prices. Tech companies and data centers, which require constant power, might slow expansion or relocate operations to areas with cheaper energy. For households, monthly energy bills could spike, adding yet another financial burden to families already dealing with inflation and rising living costs. The U.S. power grid is already under pressure due to aging infrastructure, seasonal demand surges, and shifting energy policies. Losing a key supplier like Canada could make things even more unpredictable. Blackouts and brownouts could become more common, especially during summer heat waves or winter storms. Hospitals, emergency services, and transportation systems that rely on stable electricity could face unexpected disruptions. Energy-dependent industries might delay investments, affecting long-term economic growth. Beyond economics, energy disputes could strain diplomatic ties between the two countries. With $1.1 trillion in total trade between Canada and the US in 2023, any major trade conflict could escalate fast. If the US were forced to find new energy suppliers, it wouldn't be simple or cheap. New infrastructure would take years to build, and shifting to other power sources could be far less efficient than the existing US-Canada grid system. Meanwhile, Canada could face retaliation in other sectors, triggering a back-and-forth economic battle that hurts both sides. For the average American, the most noticeable effect would be higher energy bills, which tend to spike during peak seasons like summer and winter. But the impact wouldn't stop there. When energy prices go up, so do the costs of producing goods and services, meaning everything from groceries to household items could become more expensive. And in extreme cases, widespread power shortages could put lives at risk, particularly during harsh winters when heating is essential for survival. If you found this video interesting and would love to see more videos like this, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.